Hello and welcome to Payne Records Music Night at WeWork Paddington. Thank you for the woo. My name is Nikki Hayden and I'll be your host for this evening. A little later, we'll have live performances by two amazing artists, Callum J and Atlanta May. But first, we have some very special guests who will be discussing with us the power of independent artists, and labels in the music industry. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Tams, Elliot Hale, and Wesley O'Hara. Thank you. So Chris is the Director of Independent Artists and Labels at the British record music industry. Elliot is Head of Artist Management at Vallance Records. And Wesley is the Head of Development and Training at Music Ally. So, starting off with you, Chris. You work at the BPI.
Yep.
Can you tell us who the BPI are and what it is you do there?
Right. We are the trade association, which sounds really exciting, for recorded music in the UK. We have all three major labels and about 450 independent groups running from labels like BMG, PIAS, right down to small independent labels, of which Payne Records is a very welcome member, I must add. And it's our job basically to represent recorded music in the UK, so we do that through the membership events that we do, such as training, which Wesley actually does quite a lot of our training for us. We do things like government lobbying. We do a lot of international work, helping artists and labels export their music overseas, and generally we are the best equivalent of the Musicians Union for record labels that you could think of having. So that's probably about the best way you could describe us. Essentially, we are a union for record labels.
And is it true you represent around 85%?
Yeah, I think last year's about 87, 88. It depends on which way you measure it, to be honest, which is a constant fact with stats. So, it's one way of measuring it's 95, the other it's 86. So we normally say it's around 85 to 90% of recorded music in the UK. So,
how did you get into the industry?
I started off at university. Actually, I started off before that. I started off writing about bands in my own fanzine when I was about 14 years old. That was pre-internet days, so we used to have to manufacture it on an old printing press. And I used to go and see bands all over Leeds, where I'm from. Don't know if you can tell by the accent. And then used to DJ. Started DJing when I was 13 years old, and just DJ'd and wrote about music till I went to university. And then got a job as an entertainments manager, which was sort of like the old-fashioned way to get into the music industry before they started having music industry degrees and all these nice new ways of actually learning about a business. And then got a job as a radio plugger, worked as a radio plugger for about 8 to 10 years, then went into labels, did about 10 years in labels, and then ended up working for a digital company called The Orchard, where I started off pretty much as digital music started in the UK, and then left there about 5 years ago to do this job. So I've had quite a lot of changes in the sort of 20 odd years I've worked in music. We started off obviously when vinyl was actually the biggest selling format back when I started. Then cassettes, then CDs came in, then obviously went into downloads and now streaming. So we've sort of seen, a huge variety in the industry as I've worked in it over the last few years.
So you've been around a little.
Yeah, I'm old is the nice way of phrasing that,
did
yes.
not say that.
No.
And the BPI, they organise the Brits and the classics.
Yeah, so we have a tagline which essentially is promoting British music. So one of the main ways we do that is through the Brit Awards, the Mercury Prize, the Classic Brits. But we also help quite a lot of other award shows. We sponsor things like the Rated Awards, which are the Grime Awards. We work with people like the Gramophone Awards in classical. And a lot of my job, obviously, is to export British music overseas. So I run a thing called the Music Export Growth Scheme for the government, which is a funding scheme that so far helped, I think, 182 artists to the tune of £2.6 million with their overseas business. So anything and everything to do with promoting British music overseas and in the UK is really what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that sounds great. So, Elliot.
Yep.
Can you describe what it is you do at Vallance Records? Tell me a little about it.
So I set up Vallance Records a year ago. I'm a one-man band. I manage and have 4 artists' bands on my label. Prior to that, I was running a record label called 1234 with a guy called Sean McCluskey, who's kind of a industry vet. And prior to that was at college, really. So I'm a fairly newcomer compared to Chris. But yeah, so at Vallance, we kind of, obviously, like I said, one-man band. So as well as obviously doing all the kind of admin stuff, it's kind of very hands-on in management, and that's kind of, we get quite creative with the bands. That's kind of, I'm always in the studio with the bands at a kind of production level as well. Looking after the artwork, the image of the bands, kind of across the board, the whole thing, really.
So you didn't go to university?
I did not.
Okay. How did you get into Vallance Records?
I moved to London when I was 16 because I didn't do that very well at school, so I kind of dropped out and moved to London to pursue music, and like I said, stumbled across this guy called Sean, who was like my mentor, and he kind of taught me showed me the ropes and let me run his record label, and that was, like I said, 4 years ago. And then a year ago I got investment and decided to kind of have a crack at it myself, and here we are.
Sounds great. So what is your personal vision for Vallance Records?
I don't know if you guys know who a person called Alan McGee is, but he signed Oasis in the 90s. I'd like to be somewhere like Creation Records. That's kind of my goal in the next 30 years. Lots of bands and a buyout by a major record label at some point.
Do you focus on a particular genre of music?
Yeah, rock and roll, punk, indie, if you couldn't tell by the leather jacket and the boots.
Wow, okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
So, Wesley, can you explain what Music Ally is?
Probably not. Well, actually, last Friday we very drunkenly redefined the company down to 3 words. So it used to be, we're a periodical and we're a training organization and we run conferences. And then we decided we're a company that helps people market music better. So market music better. That's it. That's what we do. Basically, we've been a news company for 20 years, which writes about digital change and startups and digital marketing in the music industry. We've really kind of specialized down to startups and marketing. In that sense, as our periodical team gets informed by whatever new is going on in the industry, we've also boiled that down to training. And I run the training at Music Ally, which is we'll work with the internal marketing teams of all of the major record labels, ones like Pias, Beggars, Domino as well, people that attend and are members of the BPI training in about 35 countries. And so it's everything around digital strategy and marketing, all the way from president level staff down to entry level employees. Really just to make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
And what is it you do there in particular?
I run the training for the world.
For the entire world?
Yeah.
And how did you get into that exactly?
Oh, there's a story that I'm not going to tell. And the story that
we want to hear it, don't we?
am going to tell. No, that one's not on the record.
Give us the PG version.
The PG version is we got very drunk someplace, and music industry skills and drunkenness sometimes go hand in hand. But the real story is I made a lot of friends by networking very well. I was working in festival marketing, and the company I was working with, essentially they said, hey, how can we make a data strategy that really captures a whole ton of data? And I said, hey, look, just so you know, this is going to make a couple jobs in the company obsolete, including mine. And they're like, do you think it's worthwhile? And I said, sure. So I set out, did that for them. So if you've ever heard of Bonnaroo or Outside Lands, we changed a lot of the data structure there. And going forward, the person who was my predecessor at Music Ally got poached away by The Orchard. And nothing to do with Chris, but at that point, the Music Ally people said, hey, Orchard boss, who should we hire next? And they go, oh, definitely Wes. And we all did a call. We realized we got very drunk in Cannes one time together, and we all were best friends and co-workers ever since.
Well, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
So, Chris, streaming services saved the music industry from the piracy of copyright material and gave artists another income stream to benefit from. What are your thoughts on streaming services?
Well, like it or not, I think the last figures we put out on Monday, I think of consumption, streaming is about 65%, and it's going up exponentially. I would probably think by the end of the year it'll be more towards 75%. And it's opened up a whole new source of income for a lot of artists. A lot of artists never used to really earn much from downloads and from physical sales, especially catalogue artists and artists on indies. And, streaming has opened up a whole new income stream for them. There is a lot to be said that the income they get could be more, but, I think rather than having a go at the streaming services that are licensed, the people you really want to have a go at is the YouTubes of this world who aren't licensed, who are in essence a music streaming store but don't pay a tenth of what they really should do. But I think for most artists, if you've got a good digital strategy and you're actually prepared to put some work in, streaming can be a really good source of revenue for you. But it's different in very many ways to the old traditional model in that you have to constantly update and engage with your fan base to to make money out of it. You can't just simply put a record out there and expect people to find it. There's so much more competition, there's so much more music out there that you tend to find that the artists do very, very well on streaming tend to be the artists that really work and really connect with their fans, that do a lot of work, be it through social media, gigging, whatever which way they do it, but they tend to do a lot of work. The artists that just put it on there and do nothing tend to make bugger all.
Do you think that has to do in part with record labels and essentially the shares that they provide to their artists through streaming?
Bizarrely, there's some stats that we put out last year that actually the share of revenue to artists has gone up exponentially over the past few years. I don't have the figures to hand, but we did actually release them out a couple of years ago. What's happened is that the actual pot of money that's gone has got smaller. So the artist share of that money has actually got bigger. But obviously that pot's got quite smaller. But we are seeing a return to growth. I mean, we put figures out last year that the growth was anywhere between 6 and 8%, again, depending on how you measure it, how you figure on it. And most of the artists now have had deals that if they were pre-streaming have been updated. There were obviously a lot of legacy contracts around from the 70s, which didn't even put in downloads, never mind, actually didn't even have CDs in, never mind downloads. So obviously with the streaming model being completely different, it has taken quite a while to get those. But I think now with most contracts on artists, they're pretty much up to date with contracts. And obviously the shares are dependent on whatever your record deal is, and then that's on an artist-to-artist basis, label to label. Some do 50-50 rev shares, some do percentages, some do all sorts of weird and wonderful different methods. So, without looking at each individual contract, on a separate issue, most of the contracts now will have, clearly defined rates and percentages for the various different formats that are released.
So you mentioned physical CDs.
Yeah.
Do you think that eventually they will go out of fashion?
No, not particularly. We've actually seen quite a growth in vinyl over the past few years, really up, sort of 10, 20, 25%. CDs still do account for about just over 50% of revenue, so they are massively important. And I think what we're noticing now with formats is that a lot of people have such a multi-format way of experiencing music, Yeah, there's all sorts, who'd ever thought cassette day would have happened? I mean, I used to buy cassettes when I was a teenager back in the 80s, and they're massive now. It just depends on what an artist or what as a label your priority is. There are labels that are streaming only. There are ones that are still sticking on CDs. There's some that do absolutely amazing box sets. Yeah. The classical music industry is a really good point. They still are able to sell box sets for 125, 130 quid. Streaming doesn't really work for them, if they're not working in contemporary classical. So I think there's sort of a balance point, and it depends on label to label, artist to artist, and also genre to genre about how important each format is. But you will find just as many, rock labels that release CD only as streaming only, I think it really does come down to sort of choice. The only thing you've got to be really careful about now is you can't really tell people anymore how to consume music. You used to be able to. It was like, oh, go and buy my CD. Yeah. You do that now, people just go, I don't like CDs. Or if you go stream on this platform, and they go, well, I don't use that platform. So what you've got to do is make it as available as possible on as many different methods and formats and you know, outlets as possible to try and engage every single fan. Because if you release a track, say, for example, on one streaming store, if I don't use that streaming store, I'm never going to have it. You know, and the only other option to me then is to nick it or not listen to it. So, you know, if you're silly enough to go, oh, it's only available on this store, you're really sort of setting yourself up for a fall, rather than saying, look, it's available anywhere you want to get it on these hundreds of different methods. You choose the method that's good for you. And I think that's what labels have really had to learn over the past few years.
So what are your thoughts on artists who do exclusive deals? Do you feel like they are jeopardising their fan base?
It depends on who they do it with. It depends if they do it on exclusive for a time period. I mean, I used to work in digital marketing where, you know, I used to have to try and get artists on the front page of iTunes, on Amazon, etc., etc. And there was a thing where, you know, you'd have, say, an exclusive period or, say, an exclusive track or something. There are a lot of artists who've recently done specific deals with certain streaming stores on videos. I think as long as they're only for a short amount of time, I think the fans will, you know, will be fine on it. I think the problem is when you only release it in one method. I mean, obviously the Wu-Tang Clan album that went on one CD, that the guy who was he was in prison actually, you know, the pharmacy guy, you know, you can do that if you're Wu-Tang Clan. If you're anyone else, you probably can't. You know, and as I say, I think what labels have learned over the past few years is that you can't tell people how to, you know, experience your music or sample your music or buy your music, whatever. You've just got to offer it in as many different ways. And, you know, you'll find your market in each one. You know, you've got people who will not buy vinyl, people who do, people who buy vinyl and stream, some buy CDs, some buy cassettes. There's just a million different, some buy everything, you know. And I think, you know, if ever you've got an artist who only wants to do one method of doing it, they're almost cutting their nose off to spite their face. They're telling other people who don't use that other format, you're not important to me. And as an artist, you want as many different people as possible to like your music. You know, and, you know, there are many arguments for and against every single format going. But, you know, realistically, if you're a music fan, you just want to hear music, and you'll find a way that works for you. And if you can't hear that artist on it, well, you know, you're not going to listen. You're going to listen to somebody else.
Yeah. Okay. Elliot.
Yep.
A few years ago, Prince said major record labels were slavery. What are your thoughts on this?
Probably more suited to Chris, this question, but
It will come back. It will come back to him. Don't worry.
I mean, me and Chris were talking about it when we were sat at the bar. I mean, and Chris pointed out that Prince had 4 records before he got a hit. So he was bankrolled by the labels for, I don't know how many years, but for 4 albums. You know, advances on each record, on records that weren't recouping. You know, and then it's kind of like, you know, it's a record label's job to tell an artist to go into the studio and then, you know, write some songs and release them and do the whole kind of world tour and all that kind of stuff. It's the label and the management's job to do that. They're not slave drivers. You know, yeah, you are tied into contract, but no one forced you to sign the contract in the first place. Really, you were the one that wanted to be famous. You know, everyone's got a job. You know, I don't think you can call a record label a slave driver or being signed to a label as slavery, because, you know, no one signed it for you. You did that. You know,
And I
you
guess
knew what you were
everyone's
getting
always, I guess everyone's always trying to get the best for themselves.
Yeah, of
How given
course.
situation.
I mean, you know, I'm sure, you know, the deals that were signed, you know, when Prince was kind of, you know, signing those deals were probably fairly unsavoury. They wouldn't have certainly been as friendly as the deals that are going around now, I think. Yeah, like I said, no one forced him to do it. He was, you know, he wanted to be a performer, he wanted to be an artist. You know, artists have to record music and they have to go on tour and they have to perform on stage for their fans. That's their job.
Chris, do you share the same sentiment?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, you know, it's as I said, I think it was 4 albums in 5 years that Prince did, and obviously without even being privy to the contract he signed, you know, he had a fairly good gestation period with it. But, you know, in essence, you know, record labels almost act as a bank or, you know, a a financial, authority for like artists when they first start, and as you just obviously just said now, obviously deals have changed slightly, over the years. I mean, the first deals that were signed in the start of the century were buyouts for 25 cents if you were lucky, and you weren't bugger all after it, Thankfully, those days have gone. I think most contracts now are transparent. Certainly, it's very interesting with the news that's happening this week about Spotify's IPO. All of the labels, including a lot of indies, actually own stakes in Spotify, and when and if they decide to sell that, every single artist on those labels will be given a share of that. Now, 20, 30 years ago, that was unthinkable, and there's lots and lots of people who'll claim credit for that, all sorts of different organisations, but in essence, it's the fact that I think, record labels and artists have over the years worked out that it has to be a really good relationship between the two. You cannot have warring factions. You can't have a label being at war with their artists and vice versa, because it just doesn't work, and at the end of the day, you give an artist a load of money, put them in a studio, do lots of money on things like tour support, and you as a label are taking a massive financial gamble with that. And I think the stats are roughly about 1 in 10 makes it, that actually goes above and beyond the money that's put into them, and that one that makes it pays for the other 9. So as a label, what you're trying to do is get that figure down as low as possible, so that 5 out of the 10 work, or 9 out of the 10 work, or 10 out of 10 work. It doesn't always work like that, and it I think the story from when I was a plugger back in the 90s, I think it took Pulp 12 albums to get a hit. That would be unthinkable now, You just wouldn't do it, Whereas labels back in the day did, they saw the potential, and that took, and I'd say Prince was 4 albums, and, he went off after that and produced, then I think had to give 3 albums, most of which were fairly poor. And then once he'd got out of his contract, went on to make some really, really good albums. But, as I say, without seeing the contract that he signed, which I don't think anyone ever has, you can't really comment much more than that.
Wesley, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I think there's a basic agreement that one enters into with a label, and it is, hey, I'm an artist, I have a desire to be rich and famous, and there are terms and conditions that apply around that, and it might work and it might not. And if it doesn't work, then I'm indebted to you. And if it does work, then I made some money and you're happy too. And I think that's just the simple reality, and it's the same with any industry or business that leverages debt, from credit to housing to anything else.
Yep.
Thank you. So this question is to anyone that wants to take it. The Business Insider recently published an article saying that they believe Netflix may have to establish its own studio to create its own original content in future, because such an increased amount of production. Do you think the music industry can learn from this?
I'll comment. Just to start, Spotify are already employing artists to make music for Spotify. They're already making their own music. It's happening. Same as Netflix making their own TV shows. It's happening. It's been happening for ages. They're filling up their own playlists with music that they own. So obviously they reap great benefits from that. Don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, we actually did an event with Music Ally the other week about smart speakers and how they're changing, streaming at the moment. And, when you have a device that you say simply, oh, play me some jazz or play me some classical, play me some rock, it's not Orwellian leap to think that somebody might go, hey, we could own that music that comes out on that thing. So, I mean, that is certainly something that labels are looking at with keen interest to see, exactly how that's going to move. But, in essence, what they are becoming is record labels. There's a load of stuff in the press at the moment, about sort of DIY labels, that use certain services, none of which are advertised on Wesley's hat. There's nothing new in label services. It's been around since the 70s. It's just been rebadged quite cleverly, and I think, the BBC have got a record label, believe it or not, and have had one for donkey's years, So it's not unheard of for media groups to think, hang on, we should make our own content here. I'm just surprised there's not as much of it that's made it really mainstream, but, that will happen over the next few years.
So you think that other streaming services will follow suit?
Some will, some won't. You know, I mean, they started ages ago when, you know, Apple started doing their live gigs, you know, where Apple would then sort of own the copyright for a certain amount of time. So, you know, as I say, it's nothing new. Apple have been doing it for 10, 15, 10 years. Yeah, the iTunes Festival. You know, there's nothing new with people doing that. You know, it used to be that, you know, for example, you know, if you do a radio session on the BBC own it, you don't, you know. There's some various weird copyright laws in it, but, you know, the BBC then owns it, you know. So, as I say, it's not a new thing. It's been around for years. It's just a new incumbent version of it based on technology changing. As I say, what's the not worrying part of it, but, you know, it's how it's going to develop over time when technology changes, which, of course, Wes will know far more about than I do.
Well, there's like one very major difference between Netflix and Spotify, and that's just the volume and the percentage of existing catalog that's licensed. So, like, if you go on Netflix, you know how much stuff is in there. You see that, and you're like, oh, cool. There's a lot of stuff in here. And you're like, maybe that's like 4% of all videos that have been, like, you know, top tier, pushed to theaters, not straight to DVD releases. And then a lot of those shitty straight to DVD releases are also in Netflix. But like you get Spotify or other streaming services that are like 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of like really copyright protected catalog in existence, that has a lot higher expense of an upfront cost or an overtime cost associated with revenue that can come in based on all of that licensed catalog. So like Netflix and their 250 originals that they're pushing out this next year, which is batshit crazy, compared to Spotify and like the 2 session tracks they do every week versus the how many 15,000 tracks that get entered every week or some shit. Don't quote me on that. 25,000 that get entered every week. You know, it's 2 versus 25,000 compared to 250 versus 2,500 is like Spotify versus Netflix. So it's vastly incomparable just as far as percentage of catalog that's actually licensed. In the US, there's another service called Pandora, which is like high quality radio. But they only license a very, very, very small fraction of artists. And of those artists, they also don't license their entire catalog. So it's a kind of a different way that over time, and that, you know, they're also terribly not profitable as a company. So it's attempts from business perspectives to do similar things around licensing less catalog and potentially making more money off of it. But they're also not making heaps of original content, and they're also not, you know, at critical mass, and they're only active in America. But I think that's my bit.
Okay. This question may be more applicable to yourself, Wesley, and Elliot. What do you think it takes to actually be discovered, for an artist to be discovered?
2 people in a room at a gig. I think that's it. I mean, I think it doesn't matter if you're playing the Lexington to a crowd of everyone in there, or if you're playing, you know, it doesn't. It depends who's there at the right time, and I think so much of it comes down to things like timing and word of mouth and discovery, and like, you know, there's sections of Spotify called Fresh Finds, which is like 5 different playlists that cover all sorts of funky genres, and they're all curated by this one woman named Athena, and the way she finds music that goes on to that happens in a couple ways. So, you know, someone might text her and say, hey, come to this gig or check out this artist or anything like that. And sometimes that's business people and it's clearly B2B. Sometimes it's friends and it's just, hey, you know, check this out. I know what you like. And sometimes it's the other side of discovery, which is when a curator at something like Spotify is watching all the friction and the heat that's happening across the platform. And when I say friction or heat, I mean, if you click and you drag a song into a playlist that you make, that's a kind of, that's friction. And that song getting saved and added to your catalog, all of that friction inside the platform is something that Spotify and the other streaming services really view as, this is a high temperature track in some way, at least based on whatever population is engaging with it. And that, I think, is in the digital world, the way stuff still gets discovered. As far as in the real world, it's, you know, when's the last time you went to a gig and got your mind blown? And how easily could you tell someone about that? Because once you found somebody, if you're at a gig and you see the most amazing band in the world, but no one there knows what their name is, and they're one of the, like, they're the first out of 15 openers or some shit like that, and they're not even listed on, like, the ticket fly, whatever. you have to be able to find out who they are in some way, and then you have to be able to evangelize them. So figuring out if you as an artist can be discovered as far as like if someone can type your fucking name into Google and find it, based on your gig, based on your song name, based on anything, that's a huge step. And then how easily can that be shared is the second step. So this is why, like, even if you don't use Twitter, even if you don't use Facebook, even if you don't use Instagram, there's still a value in being present in all of those places because it increases the level to which people can evangelize you.
So just talking from experience, I find my bands by going to gigs and watching them play, and then if I think they're really good, I go and talk to them after, and I have a beer with them, and I ask them if they want to have a record deal. And most of the time they say yes, surprisingly. Funny that. You know, and yeah, I mean, you know, kind of like I said, two people in a room. One of the biggest bands on my label I found about 2 years ago playing a venue that was then called Upstairs at the Garage, which has now got some stupid name, like Whiskey Mist or something. It's called Thousand Island. Awful name. But there was maybe 4 people there, and I was one of them, and one of the other people was the band's manager. You know, there was no one there, but I thought they were really fucking good, and I signed them pretty much straight away. And you know, I get a lot of like submissions through my website, and with people finding my email address and sending me their SoundCloud and stuff. Most of the time, I don't listen to it. That's kind of because I have too much to do than spend time listening to shit bands. But I was saying to Chris earlier on, when people send me CDs, I kind of tend to put it in my CD player and listen to it, because it's kind of like they've gone through the effort of, you know, making a demo CD, you know, doing a bit of artwork for it and actually putting it in the post, which, you know, is a hell of a lot more work than emailing a list of 500 emails you've either bought from like a website, a list of record labels, or you've just kind of trawled. And you know, I mean, there's so many kind of the unsigned guide and stuff like that. You know, my emails all over the place, annoyingly. Because I probably get like a good, you know, I don't know, near on 100 emails a week from people asking for record deals, and I'm a small label, so you know, so I don't think that kind of thing, I don't think that works of being discovered, because you're just throwing you're throwing loads of shit at a wall and hoping that some of it sticks, and I don't think that's a good kind of way to look at things. I think actually, you know, find your label, you know, your ideal label, and put a nice package together and send it to them, or you know, invite them down to a gig at the very least. Don't just send them a SoundCloud link, because I think it kind of goes, you know, unnoticed most of the time. You want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's sort of a paradox at the moment that it's never been more easy to get discovered. The tools are there, you know, online with, you know, 1,000,001 different platforms and also methods of contacting people. But that means it's just as easy for everybody else. I think there's one stat I used to trot out when I first started as a plugger in '94. There was something like 250,000 tracks that were bought for the first time that year. Go to 2014, I think it was 250,000 a week or something. It was something ridiculous like that. And you know, and it's what you just said. You know, getting signed by a label is great, and labels always want to sign talent, but they're looking for you to be almost ready to be signed, and that sounds a bit weird, but you know, you get bands who can't rehearse a shit live. I've got no idea how to contact a label. I've got no manager. Don't have a clue about publishing, and it's like, well, why would I take a chance on it? You know, if you go there and you know you are like the best band in your town, work on that. Then once you're the best band in your town, get to be the best band in your county. Then you know, go and start touring and really, you know, get your bloody live thing sorted. You know, make it so you can walk into a room and fucking blow people away. And it doesn't matter if there's one person there, or if there's 500 or 5,000. You know, if you can't do it live on stage, then 99.9% of record labels will not give you a chance. You know, you need to be able to turn a room of boring old farts like me who've seen 15 bands that night who can't be arsed anymore, want to go home, and you just blow them off stage, then, you know, great. But, you know, also about targeting, you're exactly right with that. I get sent emails from bands wanting to get signed. I haven't signed a band in 15 years. Why the fuck are they sending me a demo? You know, it's do a little bit of research, you know, find out who's A&R at a label, and then, you know, start sending them stuff. Don't send the guy who works in accounts a fucking CD. He's not interested, you know. Don't send the guy who's, you know, who does the International, a band that, you know, that's signed in the UK, is do a little bit of research. Yeah, you know, just don't throw shit against the wall. You know, the unsigned guy is great. I've got a lot of time for things like that. But, you know, as you say, don't throw shit at the wall. Really target, you know. I think the best story I've ever heard was the Horrors. They wanted to get signed to XL, and they literally got a job in the pub around the corner from their office. They were that determined. And it just was, they wanted to get signed to that label, and they did everything they could. And they, as I say, they took over their pub working there, found out who from XL went in there, and it ended up about a year later getting a deal. But, I mean, you don't have to go that batshit crazy, but, you know, well, you could, but, you know, it worked for them, so you never know. But, as I say, you know, it is that. He's put some effort into it, you know. I mean, I did a little stint as A&R. I was dreadful at it, so I left it. But, you know, when I was a plug, you know, and I remember walking into Warner's office in about 95. There were 5 sacks of mail arrived a day. And what they used to do is they took all the CDs out, some cassettes, they threw away all the bump that came with them and put them in. They gave everyone 30 seconds, if that. The amount of people that hadn't written their contact details on a CD was unbelievable. I mean, obviously now it's digital, you could do it better ways, you know, but the people that still try and send me a 5 meg attachment of an MP3, it's like, oh, please don't, you know. I'm sure you've got some horror stories like that, but, you know, it's blimey, we shot somebody again. You know, it's be targeted and do your homework. You've got no excuse now. You know, Google and other search engines are available. You know, is find out the label you want to be on or signed to, and target them. You know, it's difficult, but if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think there's like one last thing, which is also don't be shit. But like, there was this band at South by 3 weeks ago, I guess now, 3 weeks ago, called G Flip, and it's this like 19-year-old girl from Australia, and she gets up on stage, she goes, "Hey, yeah, this is our second gig ever." And we're like, "Holy shit." And she goes, "Our first gig was this morning." And we're like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And then we saw them, and everyone's faces melted off, and every label in the room was drooling, and they were like, "Yeah, we're playing like 10 shows this South by Southwest. Hook us up and come see us." And we're like, nailing the live and being vocal about your name and having a story and just really, really being good. I think those are a lot of the big things. If the live isn't there and someone, you know, comes to your gig, what's the point? You're going to make a shit ton more money off of tour than you are off the record, in all likelihood, for at least a considerable period of time. And then even when you get huge, you're going to make even more money disproportionately off the tour. So make sure the live's there. Make sure you shout your name from the stage. Be nice to the bartenders and the sound crew. And, yeah.
So, an open question to anyone, again. What are your thoughts on televised talent contests, such as X Factor and The Voice?
Well, one of my friends actually used to be a judge on the X Factor, so they sort of served a purpose a few years ago, and I think probably their time's been and gone now. They were huge. I mean, the first, you know, when X Factor first came on and Pop Idol, etc., you know, they were massive. They were huge, and, you know, they unearthed some bloody amazing talent. They really, really did. I defy anyone, even who works in the music industry, to tell you the last 3 winners have been, because I don't bloody know. You know, and it's almost turned into a little bit of where the novelty acts get on, and yeah, if they make some money, yeah, good on them, you know. But I think as a tool for signing really, really good talent, I think their time's been and gone. But it only takes a new artist to come through and just change all that. I mean, there's a really interesting fact at the moment that Jessie J's out in China doing the Chinese pop. That is such a clever move by her. She's bloody intelligent, that woman. Really knows her shit, and she's gone to a market that is massive, who know nothing about her. And I'm not sure what stage she's at the moment. I'm actually going to China on Friday, but
won.
She did win it. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So that is probably one of the cleverest moves by an artist I've seen in donkey's years. You know, that really is, because, you know, there's an interesting fact about China, that China has 1 billion smartphones. Every single one of them has a streaming app on it. So she is going to earn a bloody fortune on that. Would that work in the UK anymore? It depends. You know, there may well be an artist that comes through this year that changes all of that, but I'm sort of thinking it's probably been and gone by now, you know.
Yeah. I would just say, I kind of think, yeah, like you said, we can't name the last 3, 4 winners of the X Factor. I think it's lost its credibility, and as far as I'm concerned, it's not anything to do with music, really. It's just a TV show that you put on Saturday night when you've got nothing better to do. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's nothing to do with music. It's some idiot singing on a stage. It's nothing to do with my industry.
I think a lot of the problem that has to do with that is like, who watches TV live as it happens anymore? Like, I'll burn through a Netflix series of pretty much anything. Like, there's this, I'm not gonna tell you what it was. Anyway, if it's on Netflix and it's all there, it's not doing that shitty week by week drip feed thing to me, then I'll watch all of it in a day. And I'm like, great, cool. Doesn't matter if it's The Bachelor or something else. But TV, I just don't think has that same kind of impact that it used to. And like, it also comes from like, I haven't owned a TV with a set box. I've watched shit on like Netflix plugged into my TV for like 5 years. So maybe I'm different in that way, but I would imagine quite a few other people.
I don't think young people
Yeah.
own skyboxes. I don't know.
Skyboxes, nah.
Afford it.
Okay, thank you. So, again, another open question. Is streaming the best option for independent artists, do you think?
I'll start. I mean, yeah, obviously if you don't have a label, you've got no funding. I mean, you know, unless you've got a really well-paid job and you can, you know, you're kind of saving up your money, that's really your only option is to go down the streaming route, because obviously it's free to put music on there, you know, and obviously, like we said earlier on, the money that Spotify are paying out isn't massive, but, you know, I mean, you know, with the power of social media, you can, you know, in theory, you can generate loads of fans that click through and listen to, you know, I've seen so many artists that have got one single that's like huge. It's got like over 1 million hits on it, you know, and then there are other tracks that have got like nothing. But it is, you know, it's possible to, you know, obviously be completely independent, stick it on just through AWOL, like on your hat, and yeah, or something else. But that's the better one, I think.
I think there's anything that doesn't require high upfront costs is probably going to be a good option for independent artists. And streaming is one of those things. And there's a band we work with called Slutface, which is like they're from Norway, and they don't make a shit ton of money off of streaming, but they tour and they have crazy rabid fans everywhere in the world. And I think one of the biggest things that streaming has helped them with is kind of figure out where their most engaged fan bases are. So in things like Spotify, giving you access to see, hey, how many fans do I have in this city where I also have a tour date planned, and it's entered into Songkick or anything, whatever. Really being able to see where fans are is something that streaming helps independent artists do, and that helps you figure out where you need to grow things or where you can go to grow things. And that works all the way from that smaller band of the scale up to bigger bands that we have. So there's another artist whose management we work with called Cigarettes After Sex, and like they basically came off of a YouTube video. Somebody ripped their track, made a pack shot video on YouTube. It has 65 million views now or more. But that is something that, you know, that's a band that never expected to see any kind of success. It never got success initially because of a label. It got success from fans being able to share something online in a platform that still had that band's name attached to it. And in all sorts of ways, that is just always going to be valuable.
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it there. You know, I mean, the big thing, obviously, you know, is the upfront cost thing. You know, it costs money to make CDs. It costs money to make vinyl, and you know, vinyl can take you 3.5 months to do. And given the fact that about 95% of vinyl manufactured for UK record labels is manufactured outside the UK. There's a little problem that's going to happen in the next couple of years as what the bloody hell's going to happen after Brexit on it. You know, it certainly is a real problem. And, you know, we, you know, are speaking to, I think, Karen at Key Production, who are a very big sort of vinyl manufacturer, and they were basically telling me now that they're looking at 3 months waiting time to get any access to pressing plants, you know. Whereas if you mentioned on, you know, lots and lots of different distribution services, some of which you pay up front, some of which you don't, you can be on streaming and other services almost instantly. You know, it takes literally 20 minutes sometimes. And that's opened up, you know, a whole avenue of sales for independent labels. And obviously, you know, the point I made earlier, it's also opened it up for every other bugger to do it as well, though, which is a little bit of a problem. You know, you used to have years ago, labels were gatekeepers. You know, you used to have a record deal to get a record in HMV or Our Price or Virgin Megastores or the independent stores. You don't have that now. So in somewhat that filter's been switched off, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. You know, as you mentioned earlier, you know, there's an old quote from Alan McGee. Somebody asked him once, you know, how can I make it in the music industry? He said, be good. You know, but what does that mean? He said, be good. You know, and he just kept going back to that point, you know. Yeah. But, you know, streaming does offer, you know, a route to market, a horrible record company term, but, you know, it offers that almost instant way of getting your music out there that costs nothing or very little.
And we are speaking super duper Western. Like, if you go to Taiwan or something, the independent band you've never heard of before can shift 25,000 CDs in its first week, like nothing, like candy. And, you know, major acts here sometimes have a hard time doing that. I mean, Kygo sold like 37 actual albums with, I'm not telling you. Anyway, there was a low-selling release recently from Kygo. As far as actual physical goes. But that's mostly territory-based, someone from Norway, streaming-centric. Really, I think, like, just that entry point to the market with no upfront costs. And otherwise, there's platforms out there like Kickstarter or Curates or Pledge Music or whatever, and things that print stuff on demand for you, even if you can get vinyl printed off as it's bought, instead of having to print off 500 pieces of it up front and then sell off all that stock. That's something that anyone can do and still turn profit on, pretty much guaranteed. So there are options out there to make physical work as well, and to make really expensive, nice bundles work as well. But you just got to be clever about them.
Do you have thoughts on that, Elliot? I seen you pull a face.
I've kind of said my bit. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, final question. Streaming of music is glorified as an equal footing for all artists, signed to major labels, independent labels, or otherwise. What are your thoughts on artists who appear to have more influence, such as Taylor Swift, with streaming services?
You want? Yeah, go for it. It's certainly not an equal platform at all. You know, it's very blatantly obvious that the artists signed to the major record labels have got much more swing getting on those massive playlists and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's really, really hard work for your more independent artists or your artist bands signed to smaller independent labels to, you know, to kind of get that, you know, there's kind of, they do like the exclusives and stuff like that and the Spotify pre-save and stuff. Pre-save's now open to, I think, most people, if not everyone, I'm not sure. Yeah, you find a way to do it. But like when that started, that was, you know, for your big artists. It's not an equal platform. It's a platform that's obviously open to everyone, but I wouldn't say it's equal. Obviously, as with the case has always been, the majors and the artists that are signed to the majors always have more swing. That's just how it works.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's obviously worth pointing out that actually Taylor Swift's on an indie, but you know, technically in the UK it's still an indie as well. I mean, you know, streaming stores are a reflection of the industry as a whole. You know, if you've got an artist that is going to have 250,000 streams per hour in day one, every streaming store on the planet is going to put you front and center. If you've got a small, tiny app that you might get 5 or 10 streams per week, they're going to be much lower down the pecking order. That's just, you know, life, unfortunately. And I think with a lot of the streaming stores, they've trialed a lot of the facilities that are available to labels on them with big artists first to make sure that they work, you know. So there was a thing, you know, where, you know, when I used to work at the Orchard, you know, we'd get some artists onto certain things, but we wouldn't get smaller artists. And that was Apple just basically saying, look, if it works, we'll widen it out. There is a level playing field to get you on there, but as you've mentioned, you know, getting on streaming playlists is, you know, difficult. It's even difficult for guys at majors, you know, they don't have it all that easy because they're obviously competing with each other as well. So nobody has a sort of free ride, you know. And even when things like, you know, if there was an undiscovered Beatles record that suddenly came to light, there'd be somebody fucking having to go against it, why it shouldn't go on the front page of this and that. You know, it is a competitive business, you know. the business side of music is incredibly ruthless. Even in between individual labels on the same label group, it's cutthroat. But as I say, the playing field is open. I wouldn't probably say it's level, but I don't think it ever will be. You will always have artists who can command a bigger audience, who will get a bigger share of the ability to get in front of a mass market. That will always go to the bigger artists, unfortunately, and I don't think that's ever going to change. But it's the same as TV shows, everything else. The one that can guarantee a big audience. If you've got an artist that will get you 50,000 plays a minute, they're going to come against somebody who gets 49,999. It's just life, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it breaks down to just who has the resource to manage relationships. Like 2 weeks ago, there's George Ezra music that came out, and there's also Shawn Mendes music, and they look almost like identical if you see their faces next to each other and you don't know who's who. The music doesn't sound the same, but they're both pretty much the same scale, same tier of artist in a lot of ways, and the same kind of pop mass appeal. But there's only one face that can go on the cover of today's top hits in Spotify, and that ended up being Shawn Mendes. And then you look at the banner ad above him inside Spotify, and it's George Ezra, and you go, okay, cool. Those are two. That's Sony and Island there, going neck and neck. But that's probably also a priority artist, which is like 25 fucking people trying to work to get that one person's face on that one playlist for 4 weeks or 10 weeks or something like that. It's not like there's some magic secret sauce that, this artist is going to stream super massively and we're a major, so you should put them there. We have enough people, close enough relationships, and enough value to your platform and a relationship with your correct people individually that we all are stakeholders in this success in a lot of different ways. And I think in streaming, there's something called the sheer exposure effect, which means the more you're exposed to something up into a point, the more comfortable with it you become. So there's this critical point of listening, after which you've heard an artist's voice and you go, hey, cool, I recognize who that is, or I recognize this sound enough not to go ahead and skip it. And that kind of effect goes all across things like streaming. So if you're listening through a playlist, there has to be a similar level and quality and features around things like production, because if you go from one track that's super hi-fi and well-produced in pop electro to a lo-fi, house electro pop thing, and the production greatly varies, people are just going to go ahead and hit skip because their brains are freaked out for a little bit. But making sure that things flow and expectations are met, and it's something that's also familiar enough for everyone to keep listening to, those are all things that everyone on both sides of the equation is working to achieve as well. But yeah, it's leveler, it's flattening, but it's not going to be flat because relationships don't scale the same way that streams do.
Okay, thank you. So very briefly, does anyone have any questions for any members of the panel that they would like to ask? I see no hands. 3, 2, 1. Nope. Perfect.
Shock and
Well,
awe.
I would like to thank Chris, Elliot, and Wesley for joining us here at this event this evening. I really enjoyed the chat, and I hope you guys have too. So coming up very shortly, we do have performances from the amazing Callum J and Atlanta May. You can... I heard a round of applause, thanks. Woo! So you can help yourselves to snacks, to goodies at the back that are free, and alcohol, of course. And I'll be back with you shortly. Thank you.